So Barack Obama's legacy leaves much to be desired. This is a guy who, when he came to prominence, a lot of people basically heard whatever they wanted in what he was saying. You got the sense that some people thought he would be transformational and transformative. Some people thought he would effectively be like the next FDR, when in reality, he, of course, governed like Bill Clinton. So very neoliberal, very centrist, very pro-corporate. And this was at the same time, he was an amazing orator. I don't even know how to say that properly. Amazing speech giver, I should say, beloved by the establishment. And he had the ability, when he wanted to campaign in a way that sounded a lot more populist than how he governed. Well, he's really going to rub salt in the wound here, because he went on David Axelrod's podcast and he makes a comment which is honestly astonishing given his record. Listen to this.
The crisis in democracy that you're seeing, not just in the United States, but around the world, is not solely an issue of economics, but it is partially these huge economic disruptions, the speed with which wealth got concentrated, the speed with which people's lives were disrupted, made people worried and scared. And when people are worried and scared about not just their future, but their kids' futures, then the appeal of right-wing populism, the appeal of sort of a more cynical view of the social order and it's dog eat dog, and you got to kind of choose up your tribe because it's a zero-sum game. All that stuff accelerates and expresses itself in our politics.
Wow. So there were a lot of lefties who got dunked on and made fun of in 2016 because they made an argument of, hey man, economic anxiety is one of the things that's leading to a rise in the far right. And resistance liberal types would dunk on the lefties and say you're basically denying the existence of racism and how that plays a massive role in getting somebody like Trump elected. Economic anxiety doesn't turn somebody into a Nazi. It's a lot more ideological than that. So there was this raging debate for a long time on this exact issue. Now, my take on it has always been the same, which is obviously both factors matter. Some people voted for Trump because of the bigotry, because of the xenophobia, because he said the Mexicans, they're criminals, they're rapists. I assume some are good people. Some people voted for him because he said we need a total and complete shutdown of Muslims coming in the U.S. And then some people voted for him because he said, I'm going to keep your job here. I'm not going to outsource it like the other guys did. I'm going to keep your job here. It's a mix, right? It's a complicated thing. But here's Barack Obama acknowledging that a dire economic situation really turned a lot of people to the far right, really led to a rise in extremism. Because when people have material well-being and they feel like there's hope and they feel like they're climbing the economic ladder and they feel like they're going to be okay and my kids after me are going to do even better than me, when you feel like you're progressing in the right direction, you don't tend to hate your neighbor. You don't tend to scapegoat, because what are you scapegoating for? Everything's going fine. You don't need a scapegoat. So he's acknowledging this, but of course the question arises, how do you acknowledge this and what did you do about it? And we all know the answer. He didn't do anything about it. Now look, I don't want to be unnuanced here, right? It's not like he didn't do some good things. We talked about the good things. I think the Iran deal was great. I think normalizing relations with Cuba was fantastic. Obamacare had many, many flaws, but at least it gave more people health care, right? Which is, at the end of the day, ultimately the goal of something like Medicare for all or a public option. He didn't get us Medicare for all. He didn't get us public option. But his neoliberal centrism is basically a status quo protection racket where maybe you inch just a little bit. You go a millimeter in the right direction, but then the Republicans come in and they go 100 miles an hour in the wrong direction. But if you acknowledge the devastating impact of extreme income and wealth inequality on our politics, then why didn't you do anything to stop it? In fact, when Barack Obama bailed out Wall Street and the financial institutions during the subprime mortgage crisis and the Great Recession, there were companies that handed out bonuses to people who bankrupted their own companies. And this is tax money that we're talking about. Taxpayers got hosed. Americans got hosed. They did a bailout from the top down, and it didn't trickle down. Jon Stewart and many other people were saying at the time, why don't you bail out the people at the bottom so they can stay in their homes? People got foreclosed on left and right. So if you acknowledge the rise of extremism tied to a lack of material well-being and extreme income and wealth inequality and basically living in a new Gilded Age, why didn't you do something to stop that? Why didn't you get us Medicare for all? Why didn't you bail out the bottom instead of the top? Why didn't you do a UBI program? Why didn't you try to do some pro-union legislation to give workers a fighting chance to get decent wages? Why didn't you do paid vacation time by law? There's a million things you could have done to blunt the march in the direction of the far right and Trumpism, and you didn't do it. So I should listen to this whole podcast because I want to see if he wrestles with that legacy, because I don't think he does. Because even though he makes this point in the abstract, in a very passive voice, when you really dig deep, and I've heard him say this before, what he really says is the rise of the far right is more tied to right-wing media, which has created an alternative reality and has drilled it and brainwashed people, drilled it into their heads and brainwashed people into believing Democrats are the enemy, the left are the enemy, liberals are the enemy. And so basically through the power of propaganda in media, that's really what's led to the rise of the far right. And you know what? There is a point there. And in fact, I agree with that to a certain extent. But the thing he said here is true also. And the fact of the matter is there's not much you can do to fight that, to fight the propaganda machine on the right, other than have a good propaganda machine on the left, effectively, and try to give the truth. But there is a lot you could have done about this. There is a lot you could have done about the economic situation. When you had a super majority, you could have got a lot more done. You could have raised the minimum wage. You could have raised taxes big time on the wealthy. You could have done a public option or Medicare for all. Any one of these things, or a mix of these things, would have made it so that the time was not right for Trump. That he wouldn't have become as big as he did. But we'll never know, because he didn't do the right thing, and so here we are. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.